All right, I'm going to talk to you guys about some things to think about if you're upgrading your engine power plant on an earlier car. It's 1967 and earlier. You're going to have to do some modifications if you're putting a doghouse fan shroud on, or if you're running dual carbs or both. Especially if you're doing both, you really need to think about some things that are missing on these early cars. These early cars only had air inlet along here, and all the cooling air comes in through this smaller area. And if you notice, on your later model car, they have vents in the deck lid. And the reason they have that is, in 68, 69, they had some vents in there, and then they went to I think 71. I think when they came out with the dual port, I think they actually put more vents in the deck lid. I don't really remember exactly because I don't mess with those late model cars much. But what they did is they had more vents in the deck lid to give it more air, because what happens is when you put a doghouse fan shroud on an engine, and I'm not saying not to do that, that's actually a good thing to do, on a bug. On a bust, the air, there's plenty of air there, so there's plenty of vent. On the bugs, there isn't. So what happens is you suck more CFM of air through the fan, and then you can starve your carburetors for air, especially if you have dual carbs. But you can also not have enough vent above for just the doghouse alone. So sometimes just running a doghouse fan shroud on an early car, you can suck air to where the carburetor doesn't really have, might want to run lean or not have enough air, so it might run a little bit rich. Might give you some issues while you're driving it. So these are all things you have to think about whenever you do any modifications. And I'm not saying don't do them. I love to do modifications. You have to look at the whole chain of events. You can't just do one and then just go, okay. You got to look at the entire chain of events. So when you put a larger fan on for a doghouse, because they're bigger fans, they're wider, they take more airflow. You're bringing more CFM of air through. You're going to starve some things. So a couple of things you can do that we did, is, and some of you guys are going to like this. Some of you guys are going to go, oh my God, you're crazy. Don't do that. One of the things we did is we'd stand the deck lid up a little bit, about an inch. So it's not really that noticeable. We'd stand the deck lid up about an inch, and that would allow air when you're driving down a road to suck through here. Some of the problems with that is your airflow goes from here and goes out the back. Okay, when it goes out the back, it can swirl back up and go through in there. It doesn't usually do that. It usually runs cooler. I used to run, years ago, I'd run mine stand off on the freeway, and it cooled my engine way down. So it does work. It does make it run a little cooler. But if you're just sitting, sometimes, when you're not moving and you're idling, it can bring the air from the back of the engine. Because remember, your airflow goes in through the fan, through the things, and then pushes to the back of the car all the years, unless you have some different tin that you have on there for performance. Like these are the old 36 horse ones, and basically it's the same for all the years, but they just look different. So you had the air would come down from the fan shroud down here and go out the back of the car. And so sitting there, the air can just go back out, and then start to heat rises once it gets past the outer of the car and goes back in. It goes back, sucked back in to the engine. So if it's sitting idling for a long period of time, it could run hot. It doesn't usually, but it could. I'm just giving you the idea to think about, if you do these things. So if you run dual carbs, you end up even bringing, now you floor it with dual carbs, and you've got the fan RPMs up, and you've got the dual carbs sucking all the air. You're definitely not going to have enough air coming through here. So guys would do, again, they do the standoff deck lid, you know, the old school standoff. And of course, I don't really like that, because if you drive in the rain, get stuck in the rain somewhere, it's going to get your distributor wet. It's not a fun day. So, you know, I don't really like the deck lid standoff, but that's why they have them, is because to bring more air in. Another thing a lot of the guys were doing is they would get a convertible deck lid and put those in, and that's a really good way to go. You put the vents either this way, or I think the oval window go that way. I can't remember. I think they go that way. So they put the vents in for the deck lid for the convertible, and because the convertible, remember, didn't have this vent here at all, so it just had that. But if you're going to do that, make sure you put the tray in underneath so that it catches the water and brings it down and lets it back out, because if you get stuck in the rain, it's no fun to have that water get on your distributor, and it won't be a good day if that happens. The other thing we've done, which I know guys are going to fight me on this one, is we've left this piece of tin out. And so the problems with that, again, are your throttle cable goes through this little hole. It kind of keeps it stabilized. We always would put a hose clamp behind the fan shroud to hold the tube from sliding. If you're breaking throttle cables, that's the first place to look, is on the back side of your fan shroud, where the tube comes through right here. Slide a hose clamp over the tube and tighten it down so that tube won't move. Because if that tube's, what'll happen is it'll slowly walk its way up, and then that cable will rub on the edge of one of these holes, usually the one on that other piece. Usually it'll rub right there and it'll break the throttle cable. It happens all the time. So I always put a hose clamp on that behind it. No matter what year or model it is, I just do it with all of them. On the early cars where they had like that one, where it had the early 28 carburetor that didn't have a return spring on it, and the return spring was on the other, it doesn't usually cause an issue, so you don't need it to be on those, but I still put it on there. I put it on there because it makes it a lot easier to slide the throttle cable in when you pull the engine out. It just makes it much easier. So, cause and effect of leaving this piece of tin out. And this is what we have looked at. Okay, remember, your engine flow goes from the front of the car to the rear. This is in the front. If you leave the rear tin out, this one, you will have a hot running engine. It's going to be a problem, okay? Because all the hot air is coming down, and it goes right back into underneath this one and comes back up and gets sucked in to the engine compartment. Okay, going down the road, when you're driving down the road, cool air is pressurizing on this side. And so if you have this piece of tin missing, we found that you get just more air in there. So if you don't want to have a standoff, and you don't have a convertible deck lid, and you don't want to stand your deck lid off a little bit to bring in more air for the dual carbs or whatever, this tin can be removed and done and have it work. Some other guys will do this. They will take this piece out and actually cut a hole in the side of here. The problem we get from that is that tire is on the other side of there, and all the fender move, all that stuff brings dust in, and it seems to get a lot more dust into the engine compartment. So just leaving this one out is usually my favorite one to do if you're going to do dual carbs and you don't want to have a standoff, and you don't want to have, like on an early car like this, it's a little tough to put in, have this one pop out. On the later models where you had the push button deck lid, we would just put a spacer right here and a spacer right here between the bolts, and then it would have that little latch thing a little higher, and then that would give you that little 1 inch or so of standoff. Just make it so it doesn't seal, and that extra air really would make a difference if you're running a doghouse fan shroud. Okay, the other problem when you got the doghouse fan shroud is you have your exit right here, And you need this tin on there typically with the doghouse because you got to have the exit going out this way, right? It's going out here and then it shoots downward, and then as you're going down the road, it sucks that hot air that coming out of your cooler down and underneath the engine. What you need to do if you're going to do this, if you're going to leave this one out, you need to duct. You need to make your own duct system and duct that hot air all the way out and have it so that it goes underneath your engine so that it doesn't want to blow down and then just circulate back and get sucked up through the fan. So you have to make your own ducting out of some sheet metal and whatnot and kind of duct it down towards the bottom of the cylinders and then shoot it backwards. So you have to do all that if you're going to leave this one out. We've done it before. It does work. Okay, so that's one of the options. The other option you can do is full flow your case, which is take this plug out here, you put a plug in here, plug in your oil pump, and you put a oil pump cover on it that has a tube that goes out of it. You run it over and put a nice good size oil cooler. I like the 72 pass or the 91 or 92 pass oil cooler. You could run that and run a oil cooler delete. So then you don't run a doghouse fan shroud. So you can do that as well and just put that on there. Now this is going to make your engine oil possibly. It really makes it about stock if you have one with a thermostatic or without the thermostat, but just a regular fan on it. If it has to have a good fan, the MP kit one, the 72 pass, with the fan on it running all the time, runs about stock oil temperature. But what you end up doing is you end up having more air to number 3, so your head temps are lower, and it does help out a bit with total cooling. Now, so your oil temp should be similar to what it is with a stock cooler, with a stock stand-up cooler, but your head temp is going to be lower, so that's going to give you total cooling a little bit better, but not quite as good as the doghouse. So you run an oil cooler delete, you have an external oil cooler, run through full flow, okay, and you locate that up underneath the transmission. Usually we put it right over here on the left-hand side, and of course put a spin-on filter as well to give yourself a little more oil volume. And then we can leave that piece out, and it usually will help still bring in more air so you can run the dual carbs and still have a stock look. There's a lot of options. Just throwing them out there. Guys aren't going to like this one. They tell me all the time that it runs hotter. We tested it. It does not run hotter without that piece of tin in the back. Only on a doghouse. If you have a doghouse fan shroud and you don't put the ducting to make it go all the way down and go underneath, the ducting should go all the way down and then underneath right here, okay, then it works. If you don't put the ducting on, of course, it's going to blow out of here. It's going to suck right back into the fan, and you're going to have a hot running engine. It won't even help to have a doghouse on it at all. It'd be better just to go with an oil cooler delete and then put the second oil cooler up underneath the transmission, in the transmission area, underneath the package tray, and on the left-hand side. We found it to get plenty of air under there. Found it to really work well in keeping the engine running cool. I think we got a little bit cooler oil temp than actually stock, but not by much. And not going to be significantly cooler, but the head temp was lower on that, on that type of setup. So it did work. We found out that it does work. Guys are going to fight me on it, but oh well. At the same time, most of the time when you're running a dual carb engine, you're running a merged exhaust. Like this one here. This is an old 4-tuned. These were really good and worked really well. And if you notice, it's kind of like, this is before AA or A1. So this was like the best of the time in the 90s. And when you have one of these exhaust systems on your Volkswagen, you cannot run the heater boxes. So you won't be able to run this piece of tin here because the exhaust goes right underneath where this is. So you can't fit this piece on there. So the best way to correct that is to use the Type 3 cooling system, also known as the super cool tin. You guys will say that these don't work. All this stuff works, okay? It just depends on the application. You got to make sure you look at the whole chain. You can't just change one thing and go, oh, well, I did it. You got to make sure that you've looked at the entire situation, how the airflow goes, how it's going to work for your car, why you need it. I run these on anything that's performance, because usually I'm not going to be able to run that little small deflector plate that goes underneath between the two cylinders. That's where these go, underneath between the two cylinders. Because if you're running a merged system like that, and you don't have heater boxes, you're going to have a giant gaping hole between that piece, that little deflector plate that goes underneath between the two cylinders, and the side of here, where if you had all the tin on, it goes around the corner and it helps to create enough airflow around the cylinders. If you don't have that a piece that goes underneath and the little short one that goes on here, you're well under Volkswagen engineering. You're under engineered the car. Now you're destined to run hot. So the way to cure that is to put these on, okay? And then what that does is give you a metered hole to put your air through, and then more air through the heads. They do work. Almost all applications these work better, but there's sometimes they may not. It may not be. It's not really necessary to have them on a stock engine that has all the tin. If you have the one that goes down and around here, and you have the little short one, you need the little short one too, so that all the air gives a chance to go all the way around all those cylinders. That's what this thing does right here. It makes the air go entirely around the whole cylinder and then through this metered hole. That's why they worked on the Type 3. That's why Porsche had the same type of a thing on the Porsche engines, and they do work. So guys will say they don't, but they do. It just depends on the situation. You got to really look at your whole thing, learn from all this stuff, take your situation and look at the entire chain of everything and figure out what's best for you. This is what I do on everything I build, everything I put together. It's got a lot of thought. That's why my cars don't overheat. So I don't break down on the road very often. I very rarely even have tools with me because it's just doesn't happen very often. I carry some with me all the time. I got my AAA card too, because it does happen. They are old cars. They do break down. But when I'm going to like Octo and stuff like that, typically not. I won't even bring tools with me, and it's 60 miles from my house. So, it's a bit of a drive each way, but the car's very reliable when I have all the stuff right. And I looked through and did the whole chain of events that's happening, and then I don't usually break down. So every once in a while, like I said, my engine's blown up before. Sometimes things happen, but not very often. Usually it's when it happens, it's so catastrophic that it wouldn't have mattered if I had tools anyway. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Hope this helps you. If you're running dual carbs, honestly, you got to think about some of the stuff, and you got to bring that air in somewhere. This is the easiest thing to do, is just to take that one off. But if you're, like I said, if you're running doghouse, you got to put that ducting all the way down, and you're gonna have to do that with the engine out. You're not gonna want to do that with the engine in the car. You're gonna make that whole duct, make one that goes down and goes underneath and ends up down like right underneath here, okay, and blows the air out the back. because this air is going to be blowing down, and then when this comes down, it's going to be blowing here, and it's just going to blow across. And if you have these on here, it's not going to hurt to run your engine hotter. So if that thing's just blowing down to right here, okay, this one's going out, you're going down the road, it's going to be blowing to the back. You're not going to have a problem unless you're just sitting there idling. And then again, when you're doing that, and you have all this extra stuff, you might have an engine that runs hot just sitting there idling and idling, idling. The stock engine, no. But these, yeah, when you over-engineer it, you put that big engine in there, it can run hot sitting there idling. Talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.